Welcome to the Mental Playbook with Christine Dalgety. We're here to chat about all things mental health, share some awesome stories, educate, and advocate to break stigmas and gain power through knowledge for all ages and walks of life, and give you the tools you need to boost your mental game. We've got some seriously cool guests lined up, some amazing therapists from our private practice, and together we'll spill our secrets on how to stay mentally sharp and handle whatever life throws at you. So grab a coffee, get comfy, tune in, get inspired, and let's dive into some fascinating conversations. Remember, your mind is super powerful, and with the right tools and knowledge, you can master your mental playbook. And while you're doing that, take care of you. Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of the Mental Playbook with Christine Dalgety. Today we're going to talk about social anxiety, otherwise known as, you may have heard it as social phobia. That was in the diagnostic criteria manuals before the 5th edition came out. We're going to talk a little bit about what it is, what causes it, some myths and misconceptions about it, the symptoms, how to manage it, and what it's like living with it. So just to start, I like to start with some statistics and stuff to show the prevalence of it and why we need to talk about it. And according to the College of Psychologists of Ontario, social anxiety is the most common of the anxiety disorders. And between 8 to 12% of people are diagnosed at some point in their life. In comparison studies they did in Canada from between 2012 and 2022, social anxiety, cases of diagnosed social anxiety, increased from 3% to 7.1%. And I think some of that might have had to do with the pandemic, of course. And almost a quarter, 24.7% of that population of diagnosed social anxiety, almost a quarter of it is women between the ages of 15 and 24. So young women in Canada, and those stats are on Stats Canada. And that is diagnosed. I wanted to stress that a lot of the times when we see these statistics, they're diagnosed. I have social anxiety disorder. I'm not diagnosed. I know. I figured that out myself. And I know a lot of people that probably would be diagnosed with it, but aren't. So those numbers are probably much higher. Social anxiety disorder usually starts in childhood or teen years. Most people notice the symptoms before the age of 18. Often because that's when, from our last podcast, that's when the brain is still developing and those messages get embedded in there. It doesn't mean that, we don't develop maybe some symptoms in adulthood if all of a sudden we're in relationships and that sort of thing that are highly critical. But usually if it's disordered, those symptoms are present in our early years. And most people with social anxiety disorder have comorbid conditions. So what that means is other conditions with it. And social anxiety is usually comorbid with depression, panic attacks, eating disorders, and substance use disorders. All right, so let's get on to it and talk about what social anxiety is. It is common for people to feel some anxiety in social situations, like from time to time, like if you have to give a speech or job interviews, meeting people for the first time, having to talk to people in positions of authority. That's normal. That's appropriate, right? People with social anxiety disorder feel more than that nervous energy that typical people might feel in those situations. They worry a great deal about it and have a lot of physical sensations and intrusive thoughts about these social situations. They are afraid that they're going to do something embarrassing or they're going to look stupid. People are going to judge them. Then they end up feeling really self-conscious and like they're always on stage, right? Center of attention. It's like the minute that somebody with social anxiety disorder talks, they feel like all of a sudden there's a big light on them and all eyes are on them and they can feel themselves getting red. Sometimes their lip kind of goes a little bit and you're hyper aware of the attention that you're receiving. Some people with social anxiety might fear a lot of different situations. Like I said, like meeting new people, going to parties, presenting things, starting conversations, being the center of attention, even ordering from a restaurant or online or, sorry, on the phone. But some people with social anxiety disorder, I'm one of them, it's more anxious about certain things, right? So maybe just public speaking is something that really is heightened. It doesn't mean that you don't get anxious with the other things, or performance-based things. That's where mine mostly is, because it kind of goes hand in hand with perfectionism. Or social anxiety disorder can create perfectionism because if I am perfect at things, then nobody can judge me, nobody can criticize me. I also want to talk about some triggers that might occur for people, so that if you're experiencing social anxiety symptoms that I'm going to talk about next, but if you're experiencing them, then you know some of the triggers that you can prepare yourself for. And if you know somebody that has social anxiety disorder, maybe you can help them, reduce some of those triggers or help them work through the triggers. So a big one is meeting new people, small talk, being in public places, conflict situations. So the problem that happens though, with social anxiety disorder is that we see any conversation where we have to express our opinion, our emotions, our concerns as conflict or confrontation. It's a conversation, but the social anxiety brain puts you on heightened alert, and if I say something, I might hurt them, they might get mad at me. If they start to yell at me, I'm done. They'll think badly of me. So conflict situations is huge with social anxiety disorder. Being the center of attention, eating and drinking in front of other people, and performing or speaking in front of others. And again, a lot of people have anxiety over speaking in front of others. However, social anxiety is this heightened worry and symptomatology that comes out. So let's talk about some of these symptoms, some of the things that come up with social anxiety. I'm going to just kind of briefly talk about it, and then I'm going to break it down into what we look at when we're doing cognitive behavior therapy for social anxiety. So first off, the main thing is people with social anxiety disorder feel like they're saying or doing the wrong thing. They might think that other people are going to look down on them, they're going to think poorly of them, they're going to think they're strange or weird or stupid, is one I hear and thought a lot. And it's important also for us to notice or to recognize that people with anxiety, adults with anxiety disorder, are very much aware that there's anxieties out of proportion to what the situation is. We're very much aware that we're highly anxious in these situations. It's just not that easy to just calm yourself down and say it's going to be all right. So let's look at some of these symptoms. We're going to start with thoughts. So some of the thoughts, if you start to notice that you're having some of these thoughts, start to pay more attention in a more information gathering way. So if you're having negative thoughts about yourself, so things like, I'm going to say something stupid, I'm going to look anxious, that's another part of it that we're going to talk about in a second, people noticing the anxiety, I'll have nothing interesting to say, or thoughts about how other people will react to that person. So people won't like me, people are going to think I'm stupid, people are going to think I talk too much, people are going to think I have no idea what I'm doing. This is supposed to be, my expertise, and they're all going to say, why is she doing what she's doing? Or why is he doing what he's doing? Because he knows nothing. Those are thoughts that pop in your head. Colleagues are going to think I'm weird. Colleagues are going to think I'm inadequate. And then it can also be thoughts like what if thoughts. So what if I say the wrong thing? What if I offend somebody? What if I go in there and nobody likes me? Or if I tell a joke and nobody laughs at me or laughs with me, not at me? What if I go to present this stuff, I go to teach this stuff, and I forget everything? all these thoughts are these, we call them intrusive because they just keep coming in. Another thing that can happen is people after conversations, after you meet somebody, for days after, you go over and over and over what you said, how you acted, thinking, oh, why did I say that? I know I totally upset them. They're probably so offended. I sounded so stupid. And you keep going over it. And another thing that happens with thoughts too is, and this happens to me, is you may be, for me, I might be cooking or something, and all of a sudden a thought pops in my head of something I did when I was 19 years old or 18 years old. And I feel this sense of embarrassment and dread. And I'm like, why would I do that? They must have thought I was such an idiot. And now it's managed, and I'm going to tell you ways to do that. But now I can turn it around and say, they probably don't remember. You're probably the only one that remembers that. And you didn't remember it, it just popped in your head, right? So those are some of the symptoms, the cognitive symptoms that come with social anxiety. The feelings that come with social anxiety, obviously anxiety, fear, nervousness, embarrassment, inadequacy, and a lot of people describe feeling small. If they're in a room, they feel small until they go to speak. And then it's like they take up the whole room because everybody is looking at them. And then body reactions. Believe it or not, people with social anxiety, well, first of all, it's kind of a double-edged sword because when we're feeling anxious, we have these body reactions. And then with social anxiety disorder, when we have the body reactions, it increases the social anxiety because we don't want people to see us that way. So we might start sweating or blushing. The lip starts to go a little bit. We might be shaking, have a racing heart, feel nauseous, dizzy, lightheadedness, choking sensation. So we have a hard time speaking or swallowing, and a dry mouth. So a lot of times I know that when I was feeling really anxious, I'd be really thirsty. I'd have a really dry mouth, which then makes it hard to talk. And we may stutter a little bit and then, or fumble over our words, and then that increases the anxiety as well. Some of the behavioral symptoms of social anxiety. So avoidance of social situations. So skipping the party, not going to class or a meeting, avoiding them, saying no to social plans with friends. And one thing that I noticed too, that a lot of times people with social anxiety disorder convince themselves that, well, no, I just didn't feel like it. Or they'll say to other people, nah, I just like to be alone. I like to be on my own sometimes, when really inside they're like, I don't want to be around that many people for whatever reason, the way they're going to see me, think about me, whatever it happens to be. People with social anxiety disorder also use safety behaviors. So that might include actions that they use to try and feel less anxious and in a social situation. So they may just kind of, I call it the chameleon, right? Like they just blend in to the environment. The wallflowers that just like hang out at the wall, they may not make eye contact, minimal talking. They may, be with friends and that sort of thing, but don't want people to think a certain way. I know with me, even when I'm with my friends, people that I'm comfortable with, I don't want to come across as a therapist. I don't want them to think I'm judging them. That's like a big, it's something I don't want to do to people either, but it's also my social anxiety that's like, oh, I don't want them to think that I think I'm better than them or I'm condescending to them or anything like that. And so I sit quietly a lot of times when they're talking about problems in a group. Often my closest friends will say, what does Christine think about that? Or let's ask the therapist. And sometimes I actually say, oh, I'm off duty. I'm not working today. But sometimes I'll say, okay, well, I'll tell you. And I wait for that because I don't want to be perceived a certain way. And I don't think I am that way, but that's the social anxiety piece. I'm going to talk about my story a little bit with it, but my social anxiety is almost completely managed, and I'm using the strategies I'm going to teach you, but these thoughts still come up. I just they go down much faster. Sometimes too, another big one that I've used too, full disclosure in this podcast, and our first one, alcohol, right? Some alcohol and drugs. I haven't used drugs, but alcohol. And part of that is, you know, being out when you use alcohol, you feel more free. You feel, I often say, we joke and we say, oh yeah, when they're drinking, they're 10 feet tall and bulletproof and they can dance, right? And so I know that sometimes for myself, I might, if I'm out somewhere and someone asks me to dance, I'm like, oh, I've only had one drink, I'm good, right? Now, not so much, but that's what I used to say, maladaptive coping. But I felt more free to be myself then, I guess. And I hear it from clients all the time that actually some have addictions. Remember I said that social anxiety and substance use disorders can be comorbid because it starts off with trying to feel less self-conscious and it ends up becoming an addiction. So I often get asked, what causes social anxiety? Like, do you just get it? I think that there's no clear-cut answers. There's not like one, yeah, this is what causes social anxiety or causes people to develop social anxiety disorder. Research, like other mental health issues, says that there's various factors, both biological and psychological, but it can be caused by combination of biological and psychological, and challenging life experiences. I think that the challenging life experiences is pretty high up there. And if you think about what we talked about last week about the developing brain, the plasticity of the brain, the messages that we receive in childhood, and remember that social anxiety symptoms usually present in childhood and teens first. So stressful or traumatic life events, like bullying as a child, mental and emotional abuse, being compared to others in a negative light all the time, consistent criticism, all of those can cause social anxiety disorder. And, for me, yeah, bullying, I was bullied really badly as a child. And so I never felt good enough. I never felt like I fit in. And I was in situations where I was compared to other people. That's really good that you won that trophy, but so and so also won this, and this. And so it's like, pff. And I did speak before in my first podcast a little bit about the abusive relationship that I was in my teens and 20s, and there was infidelity in there. And so you start to question, am I good enough? And it was at teen years that it started, right? And 20s, early 20s. So of course, that's my brain's still developing. And so not only was there the infidelity and you thinking that yourself, but in my situation, there was the infidelity and then being compared to the people. And if you were, if you looked like this or if you acted like this, then maybe I wouldn't. Or just things like that. And so then that forms your core belief that people are going to choose other people over you, or you're not going to be good enough, or you have to be perfect. And that creates social anxiety disorder. Family history, so a genetic deep predisposition to anxiety disorders. Obviously, like any mental health issue, mental health problem, that can play a factor. And other mental health or substance use problems, so comorbidity. So let's talk a little bit now, moving on, to how social anxiety disorder can impact your daily life, your relationships, and career aspirations. So we're going to look at 4 categories, like work and school, relationships and friendships, recreational activities, hobbies, that sort of thing, like personal life things, and then just day-to-day activities. Social anxiety disorder can impact every one of these areas in your life. And so again, that's where it's different from just feeling, some anxiety or nervousness in participating in social activities. So work and school. Social anxiety disorder can cause us to miss work and school. Trouble participating in meetings or classes. I used to say, or not used to, I still do, in sessions I'll say to clients, like when we're talking about, when they're like, I don't know if I have social anxiety, and I can't diagnose. As a psychotherapist in Ontario, I'm not allowed to diagnose people, but I can ask questions, I can do assessments, and I can still treat for those symptoms. So I'll ask about the symptoms and I'll say, when you were in school, or in a meeting, even if you know the answer, will you put up your hand? Will you speak? 9 times out of 10 for people who actually have social anxiety disorder, it's like, no. I don't want to be wrong. Even if I know that I'm not, I don't want to be wrong. And B, I don't want to start speaking because then the spotlight's on me. And then I turn red, and then everyone's looking at me turn red. So poor performance. So this is kind of a double-edged sword one, because there can be poor performance with social anxiety disorder because we're not attending, that kind of thing. The problem is people with social anxiety disorder don't ever want to look stupid or be wrong, or not like be wrong as in a right fighter, but like make mistakes. Don't want people thinking badly of them, so performance is usually high. And, I joke with some of my clients, and say things like, sometimes I might have a question like, I have no idea why I'm being invited to these manager and director meetings, for example. And I will say, okay, so you've been diagnosed with social anxiety disorder. Yes. All right. When you go to a meeting, do you make sure you know every single thing about what you have to talk about or what your role is? Well, yeah. Okay. Do you also know what everybody else is? What they're doing, what their role is? Because if something comes up, just like knowing yours verbatim, you don't want to look stupid. Do you know everyone else's so that you're in on everything and and you're not going to feel or look stupid? And they're like, yeah. And that's why you're invited, right? And so the joke that I say is use your social anxiety disorder for good and not evil. Use it. Understand that if you make a mistake, you're not going to make that mistake again, because somebody with social anxiety disorder perseverates on that or ruminates on that mistake. We won't make that mistake again. I remember being corrected on something in a paper when I was doing my master's. And even when I text now, I make sure I don't make that grammatical error, miss that semicolon, because I made a mistake. And so now I'm not going to make that again. So performance, yes, it can impact performance because you might redo things over and over, but it can also enhance performance in a motivational way. But I don't want you to get social anxiety to enhance things. But it can but it's a burden, right? Because it's the perfectionism that enhances that performance. Yeah. Also, social anxiety can prevent us from pursuing schools, programs, because there's no way I could ever do that. Careers, I can't do that. I'm not good enough to do that. I'm not smart enough to do that. Yeah, you are, right? But social anxiety brain convinces you that you wouldn't succeed. There's no way you could do those things. Social anxiety disorder also makes it really difficult to talk to colleagues, coworkers, bosses, teachers, students, principals, deans, whatever it happens to be, people in position of authority or people that you work with, go to school with. It makes it really hard to talk to those people, so it's very isolating. So relationships and friendships, it's very difficult for somebody with social anxiety disorder to make friends, unless of course they've been your lifelong friends. And because we're normally more comfortable and the social anxiety disorder symptoms don't come out as much with lifelong friends. Now, I did give an example about how it might come out with me with my friends, but that's more, as being a therapist and not wanting to put that on people. Most of our close friends or family, we don't feel those symptoms as high, but it does make it difficult to make friends. I mean, if you're entering a room, for example, thinking, oh, people are going to think badly of me, hope I don't say the wrong thing, do the wrong thing, act the wrong way, then it's going to be really hard to open up and make friends. It's going to be really hard to date. It's going to be really hard to go on a first date, to put yourself out there. It's because if you have that concept of yourself, that negative core belief of yourself, how are other people going to think you're enough to date, to be in a relationship with? It's also very difficult when you have social anxiety disorder to be assertive. You often stay quiet, you're often passive, you often, keep your thoughts to yourself. And it's really hard to open up to people, to put yourself out there and be vulnerable. I think that the older you get, it makes it a little bit easier. But when you're younger, it makes it really difficult to be vulnerable. When we're thinking about recreational activities, social activities, hobbies, that kind of thing, a lot of people with social anxiety disorder avoid trying new activities. They have a lot of difficulty doing that or joining things. A big one is the gym, because especially if, you're overweight or you've gained weight, or you go into the gym and your first thought is, oh, they're going to wonder why I'm going to the gym. They're going to be watching me. I'm going to look this way or that way on the treadmill. I'm not going to be able to lift, whatever it happens to be. A lot of people with social anxiety have a really hard time at the gym. But it can be anything. It can be sports. It can be pottery. It can be music. Anything. It's hard to join those things because you're so terrified that people are going to judge you and people are going to think that you're horrible at whatever you're trying to do. Taking a class, it makes it really difficult. And then our day-to-day activities. So things as simple as grocery shopping. Some people with social anxiety disorder having to go into the store, a grocery store where you're going to see a lot of people, it's like, oh, I got to talk to people. Or if you haven't seen them for a while and you run into somebody and it's like, oh, they've probably thought I've gained weight, or they probably thought, why is she wearing that to the grocery store? When really they're not thinking any of that. But that's what social anxiety does. Ordering food at a restaurant for somebody with social anxiety disorder, or sending food back. That's something that we don't do because we don't want to put that other person out. We don't want them to think we're complainers. Talking on the phone is probably the number one thing for people with social anxiety that I hear, and myself. Because if you think of the stress response, and we're not talking about talking to friends or something, like calling Bell Canada or something like that, right? If you think about the stress response, your frontal lobe, your prefrontal cortex and everything shuts down during the stress response. And so we can't think of things. We can't bring things up just like that. And so I still do this. It's still how I manage my social anxiety. But if I'm going to call, like, let's say Bell, I have my name, my birth date, my account number, my phone number, what I want to talk about, everything written down beforehand. And I remember one time my son came in to the house and I was sitting there on the phone with Bell and I had it written down and he's looking at it. And then he says to me, you don't know your name or your birth date or your, like, you have to write that down? I was like, don't judge. And so I have to, because with the stress response, if I'm not prepared, if they ask me a question, even my name, I could go blank, right? And so I have it all written down before I do it. Phone calls are not my favorite thing to do. Obviously, with what I do and running a business, it's gotten easier, but phone calls are the main thing for many people. And in today's society, how many times do people actually call people, right? It's like even Bell and stuff like that have chat on their website. So that just exacerbates a lot of those types of symptoms. Asking for help is huge because if I ask for help, then they're going to think I'm weak. They're not going to think I'm enough. Using public transit is really hard for people too. What if I get on the wrong bus? What if I don't get off at the right stop? All of these things can be really triggered by social anxiety disorder. So those are different ways that it impacts people. And when you think about those ways, that's every aspect of somebody's life, more than just being nervous. So we know what the symptoms are. We know what some of the causes are. We know how it impacts our life, but how do we manage it? How do I have mine managed now? What do I do, right? So the first thing is psychotherapy. And yes, I'm going to tell you a few ways how you can do it on your own. It's just that when it's social anxiety, if you it's helpful to have somebody else doing these strategies with you. Because if you try to do them yourself, well, that dialogue that's, in there, that inner dialogue that's telling you you're not good enough, it's going to be really hard to challenge it without somebody helping you with that. And the College of Psychologists of Ontario list cognitive behavior therapy, CBT, as the gold standard non-pharmacological, so without using medication, treatment for social anxiety disorder. And any scientific research that I have seen or that's out there does support this, or not any. There is scientific research that does support this. So cognitive behavior therapy is about learning new ways to think, so the cognition, and to behave, the action, right? Or to act, the behavior. And also then helps with our physical sensations and our emotions. And if we can do this through CBT, it'll reduce the anxiety. And that's what I do. I do cognitive behavior therapy, and I do a few other things that I'm going to talk about soon. But people with social anxiety disorder, they tend to overestimate the threat of the social situation and underestimate their ability to manage it because they see themselves as weak or incapable. So CBT teaches the cognitive techniques. So the first thing we do is we identify the thought. So that might be done through journaling, thought logs, that sort of thing, just talking to your therapist about it, your psychotherapist, and we can say, okay, so let's focus on this thought. And then we challenge it using Socratic questioning. First thing I would say to a client is that your opinion or is that a fact? And if it's your opinion, okay, then that's driven by your core beliefs. There's no facts associated with that. So let's pull out the facts, which is then Socratic questioning, which is what evidence supports that thought, right? So what facts? What evidence contradicts that thought or that belief? And so we challenge it. We try to, often I'll say, can you give me 2 facts that prove that that's what someone's thinking about you? Because first of all, unless people are, have these superpowers, they don't know what you're thinking. We project our insecurities, our negative core beliefs onto what people must be thinking about us. They may not be thinking that at all. And we can't use facial expressions and stuff like that as saying, yeah, but I saw the way she was looking at me. Because social anxiety disorder kind of distorts the way that we perceive things. So somebody could be smiling and social anxiety brain says, oh, they just smirked at me. Or they're just smiling to placate me. And so we can't use all of that as evidence to support these negative thoughts that are coming in. It's usually our core belief. Unless somebody has said, you are stupid, we can't say they must be thinking we're stupid. Or if they say, you talk too much. So unless multiple people, and sometimes if one person says it, that's their opinion. If we're getting the same message from multiple people, okay. So let's challenge those thoughts. People with social anxiety disorder also tend to avoid situations that they fear. So we do a little bit of exposure therapy in this too, because the way our brains work, if we're avoiding the situations, that feels good, right? We don't have to feel that anxiety, but it's actually maladaptive coping. Our brain thinks that it's coping in that moment because the anxiety is lower. It's not as uncomfortable. But we're not going to change it. We're going to be anxious every time we are in that situation. And so exposure therapy, and I say to clients, I'm going to push you because if we don't get pushed, we'll stand still. I'm not going to shove you. Telling people to just do it is not going to help, right? It's like picking up that snake. Just do it. You're not going to know it's going to bite you unless you pick it up. Someone's not going to pick it up. Don't shove people. So we expose them to certain situations gradually. And we change the message attached to it. We provide a script for it. Because when we do avoid those situations, it actually increases the social anxiety because then those thoughts of I'm just weak, I knew I couldn't do it, it validates those core beliefs. because the action was avoid and stay at home. Through the exposure therapy and the challenging the thoughts, I think I said this last podcast maybe, but your brain is going to try to resist it. And I had said that I joke with my clients saying your brain's going to say, don't listen to that lady. She doesn't know what she's talking about. Because even if it's maladaptive, even if it's chaos, that is what your brain is used to. So that is what it wants to go to. Once the calm comes in, once you strengthen those resisting those messages, then that's the calm. Then your brain becomes accustomed to that. It doesn't mean that, the chaos doesn't try to get in sometimes. If you continue to manage it, then that is the calm. Seeing a CBT therapist will help you in some of the things that I said. He or she will talk you through it. They'll help you challenge the thoughts. They'll give you some exposure strategies. They'll give you some situations to work through. They will help you prepare for it, increase your toolbox with that, and replace some of those negative cognitions with positive cognitions. There's also mindfulness-based therapy, and although it is beneficial as well, it hasn't been proven to be more beneficial than CBT, but mindfulness-based therapy, or there's also mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, is about acknowledging, recognizing, sitting with the thought without judging it, and then challenging it. Feeling the sensations, the emotions, the thought, all of that, the anxiety, feeling it without judging it, and then working through it. Mindfulness on its own, so breathing, relaxing, being present in the moment. What do I know to be true right now is something I say to all my clients and myself. What do I know to be true right now? Not down the road, not the what ifs. What do I know to be true right now? And what can I control right now? Being mindful, being present. And then some mindful practice, meditation, yoga, that kind of thing can help bring things down. Grounding ourselves can bring it down. And of course, pharmacology. So there are medications that I can't prescribe or talk about other than the knowledge I have. I mean, yes, I've taken courses in it, but the knowledge that I have based on because a lot of my clients use medications. And one thing I want to talk about with that, I want to share, because a lot of people say to me, yeah, but I don't want to have to rely on medication. No, of course not. Or they say, I should be able to control it. I don't want to have to take medication. And the first thing, and everyone's heard these things, but the first thing I say is, if you had diabetes, would you? If you had heart disease, would you? Do you take an inhaler for your lungs? But because it's the brain, we think that we should just manage it. And that's fine. That's cool if that's what you want to do. I'm not pushing medication on people, but I want you to think of it this way. And the clinical supervisor that I have, a psychologist, explained it to me this way. And now I explain it to my clients this way. If you think about the neurons, so the cells in your brain, the neurons that thoughts, feelings, interpretations, all of that, as islands. And you think about the synapses or those connections that go between the islands, between the neurons, as a boats. And then the chemicals in our brain that slow down those thoughts, that make us feel, like the happy chemicals, the mood moderating chemicals, serotonin, oxytocin, dopamine, endorphins. If you think of those as like the ocean, the water, and when you're feeling really anxious or depressed, mental health issues, that water's out, right? The tide's out. The water's not high enough for the boat, the synapses, to go from island to island, neuron to neuron. And so then we have the different anxieties or mental health issues. The medication that we take increases that, increases the water, the serotonin, or whatever other chemical that it might be, so that the signals can freely go between the islands, between the connections, okay? So think of it like that. And there are situations where medication is the way to go, right? Medication and psychotherapy, or medication and strategies. And so with that, if you don't feel comfortable seeing a psychotherapist, there are things that you can do. You can write down the thoughts that you're having. You can, the negative beliefs that are popping up, the negative thoughts, those automatic thoughts, you can challenge them on your own. What do I know to be true? What am I thinking right now? What facts do I have? Is this my opinion? You can ask yourself all those things and you can write them down, and then you can write down an alternate thought and try to replace it with that. The only problem is sometimes we don't recognize it, and that's other people. So if there's someone in your support system that you can talk to about it and say, can you point these out to me when they're coming up? All right, so that's how you manage it, okay? And now I just want to share a few myths about social anxiety. I think one of the biggest ones is social anxiety is just shyness. And all people with social anxiety disorder are introverts. That's a myth. First of all, shyness and introversion are personality traits, and social anxiety disorder is a mental health condition. So, no, they're not the same thing. And, being shy might mean you find it difficult to be in social situations, you find it difficult to talk to people. There's that nervous energy, that nervousness. Social anxiety is, what I've talked about. It's deep, it's intense. The fight or flight response comes on. It prevents you from many aspects of your life. And then introverts. So introversion, like I said, is a personality trait. Just because you have social anxiety disorder doesn't mean that you are an introvert. And introverts can have extrovert qualities as well, right? Someone can have introvert and extrovert qualities. I have social anxiety disorder. Do I have some introversion in me? Yes. I like to be on my own sometimes. I just like, I get energy from that. Introverts get energy from being on their own. I like that. I like to have my downtime. There's sometimes I just like to lock myself in my house for the weekend. I think that's also partially for what I do during the week for a living. But I also like to be around people. I am an extrovert in that sense too. And a lot of times when I tell people I have social anxiety, they're like, no, you don't, right? Because it's managed, but also because I have that extroversion. So all people with social anxiety are not necessarily introverts. And introverts still like to be in small groups. They might want to be around some people. It's not the same thing as trying to avoid all social situations. Social anxiety disorder is a mental health challenge with expressing fear and anxiety about social situations. So they're not the same thing. Another myth, social anxiety only affects public speaking. No, that is a big one, obviously, and I've said that. Public speaking is huge. You already feel like being on stage, that you're always on stage. And if people are all staring at you, stress response occurs, this shuts off, and you may start stuttering, you may forget everything, which is just going to exacerbate the social anxiety. But it does not only impact public speaking. And I've already said this, I don't need to go over it again, but it impacts public speaking, speaking up in class or at a meeting, meeting new people, expressing disagreement, entering an occupied room. That's another big one. A lot of people, if they're late, don't go because they don't want to walk into a room that there's people already in, because then everyone looks at them. Working while being watched is another big one that people with social anxiety disorder have. A lot of times, and I remember doing this too, but if I was people with social anxiety disorder, when they're a kid and you're doing your work in class and the teacher comes walking around and looks over you, they cover up their page, or they pretend, or they'll look up and smile and start to talk to the teacher, so they're looking at them and not their work because they're afraid they're going to do something wrong or the teacher's going to see that they're doing something wrong. Using a bathroom away from home is another big one that people have. I hear so many times, I don't want people to hear me peeing, right? And yeah, that's valid. A lot of people with social anxiety disorder will hold it. They won't go to the washroom in public. So, it's not just public speaking. That is totally a myth. That could be shyness. That could be a normal, appropriate anxiety that most people have. I don't know a lot of people that just like, yes, let's go talk in front of a whole bunch of people. They are out there, don't get me wrong. It is a common anxiety. You should avoid social situations if you're feeling anxious. That's another myth. It's understandable that you might want to avoid them, but when you do that, you're validating the belief that you're too weak, and it makes it easier and easier. So I talk about the giving in muscle and the resistance muscle. Every time we give in to these messages from our core belief, every time we give in to the messages that tell us to stay home, to avoid, we strengthen that giving in muscle. And the more we give in, then we just do it. We don't even think about it. We just don't go. We just isolate. Whenever we resist those thoughts, then we're strengthening our resistance muscle. So then it becomes easier to resist the thoughts and push ourselves to go out, to challenge those thoughts automatically and find the discrepancies in that core belief. So try to strengthen your resistance muscle. Resist those thoughts as much as you can. And don't give in to the myth that it's a better way to control your anxiety if you avoid social situations. Social anxiety is no big deal. Everyone gets it. No, everyone doesn't get it. Everyone gets anxious from time to time. Everyone gets nervous from time to time. Not everyone gets social anxiety disorder where they're paralyzed with fear or doubting themselves so much that they miss out on many life experiences. People with social anxiety disorder just don't want to be social. Most people with social anxiety disorder at their core want to be social. They want to go to the parties. They want to make friends. Yes, during the pandemic, a lot of my clients with social anxiety disorder were like, I love this. I don't have to talk to people or go anywhere. But at their core, that's their comfort zone, right? That's what their brain is telling them, is that this is a really good thing because now you don't have to go out into public. You don't have to be social. But I don't know anyone who deep down doesn't want to be social to a certain degree, doesn't want to make friends. Maybe you don't want to go to a concert or a big party, but you still want to have other people in our life. It's a human need to have people in our lives and feel those connections. It also, it then exacerbates things because then, like I had said a few times, it validates the core belief, but also, what's that term that the young people FOMO. People get that fear of missing out on things, right? And then their friends might be talking about this really fun time they had, and they're just sitting there because they didn't feel comfortable enough to do it. So that being said, social anxiety doesn't typically interfere with relationships with family and close friends that have already been established in younger years. So it doesn't interfere with them, but you could still have situations, in with your family that they say something to you and you automatically perceive that as criticism and you get your back up and that kind of thing. With family and stuff, you might not cower. You still might, some do, but you may get your back up and it may turn into an argument or that sort of thing. All right, so a lot of people want to know what it's like living with social anxiety. And as someone who has lived with it for all of my life, but I grew up Gen Xer, as I've said, and so I was told not to be so sensitive, to suck it up, and life's hard, get over it. And I didn't realize I had social anxiety until I was later in life, and I was doing things to try to control a little bit, but once I realized it, I think I was doing my master's actually in my early 40s, and all of a sudden I was like, wait a minute, that's me. And so I guess what I can share about social anxiety is it's that inner dialogue, that constant inner dialogue of self-doubt and worry before, during, and after any social interaction, any interaction with another person or a group of people. And those are things like really thinking before you speak, keeping quiet because you don't want to say the wrong thing. And then, like I had said, that dialogue after where we just go over and over how I probably hurt them, think I said the wrong thing, I probably look stupid, highly self-critical if you see a picture of yourself or these videos. Being vulnerable, no way. You don't want to be vulnerable. You don't want to put yourself out there. And if I'm being honest, when I was deciding to do these videos and these podcasts, that took a lot of cognitive behavior therapy for myself. I did it to myself because I'm putting myself out there, and people I don't know are going to make comments. And, if I wasn't where I am in managing my social anxiety, I probably wouldn't be doing this, but I am where I am, so I'm going to do it. There's feelings of isolation and frustration because, you know, it's like this constant battle of, no, you are smart. No, people do like you. Yeah, but what if I do this, right? And it's that constant battle. Living with social anxiety disorder is comparing yourself to other people. It's depending on what caused it. Like for me, I told you what caused it. It's about just assuming that if you're in a relationship, they're probably going to choose someone over you because other people are better at things, or smarter, or prettier, or whatever it happens to be. When they talk about someone else, there's that pit in your stomach, even though they're just mentioning someone else, there's that pit in your stomach that you have to work through that no, they're just mentioning that person. It's I guess just the constant self-criticism, the anxiety, the perfectionism. That's a big one. When I talk about I have a hard time learning the art of half-assing it, that's rooted from that perfectionism and having to be all and do all. So living with it is really hard, but managing it is so much more freeing. And I am a point in my life, I think that, I do cognitive behavior therapy all the time. I do incorporate the Let Them theory by Mel Robbins in my life more. And I am getting older. And so they say, the older you get, the less you care about what people think about you. And that's true to a certain degree, but using the cognitive behavior therapy and stuff. So mine's a lot of performance, so I'll give an example. I like to host. I like to cook. I like to bake. I like to host dinners and parties and stuff like that. And I can remember one situation. It was my daughter-in-law's baby shower in 2020, July 2020. So we had to have small, like pockets of 5 people or something. It had to be outside, had to be like finger things that were like I had individual cups of dip with veggies in it. Like it was, I'm doing all these things, and I had these ideas of other things I wanted to do. But I ran out of time, and my sister came over to help me, and she was scooping some stuff into little cups, and she's like, "What's that stuff for?" And I said, "Oh, I was going to do A, B, and C, but I ran out of time." And she's looking at me like, and I was doing something, I looked up, I'm like, "What? Why are you looking at me like that?" And she said, "I'm waiting for you to lose it." And I was like, "Well, no, no one else knew I was going to make it, so what does it matter?" And she's like, "Because before you would have lost it." And it's true. Before, if I had something in my mind that I was going to make, that I was going to do, and then I ran out of time or I couldn't do it or it didn't turn out, I would be in a panic situation. I would be self-deprecating thoughts that, now they're going to think that I don't know what I'm doing. I had all these plans. Now they're not going to get the food that they're going to like. And they had no idea that I was going to make it. So to them, it's no different. I convinced myself of that. So now I pull out the facts. No one else knows. When I'm doing Christmas dinner or something like that, I used to make excuses all the time. Oh, the potatoes didn't turn out just the way I wanted them to, or the gravy's not, because I would comment negatively on it before anyone else could. And my sister again would often say things like, "Chris, no one ever complains about it," right? And so now that becomes my dialogue. So if I start to make something like, "Oh, it's not working out," it's like, when has anybody ever complained about my cooking? Never, literally never, right? And if they don't like it, they don't have to eat it. And that's that's the part getting older too. And it's like, they don't like it, don't eat it, scroll on, whatever it happens to be. Those are some thoughts. That's what living with social anxiety is like. If you think, like me, that, when you're doing a paper that like for my master's, that I should get in the 90s, which most of them were, but if I got anything lower than that, I was like, almost panicked. If I got an 89, I was in a state of panic because the professor's not going to think I'm smart enough. And before submitting my papers in university for my master's and my BA, I would sit for sometimes an hour. I would sit there with my finger over the submit button because what if it's not right? What if they criticize it? What if they think that I can't be a therapist, that I don't know this stuff? And then I'd have to go through it and say, okay, Christine, what are your marks like? How often have you had comments that it's not good enough? Never. Or once or twice, right? So it's that constant telling yourself and coming up with the facts and reassuring yourself that happens with social anxiety disorder. Like I said, mine's mostly managed now, and the thoughts will always pop in my head. That's why I say mostly managed. And sometimes they stay, and sometimes I second guess, but mostly using all these techniques that I'm telling you about, they're managed, and they pop in and they pop out. Sometimes I challenge them, but what used to be an hour, a day, a week of ruminating over them, it's not. It's a few minutes now. Maybe an hour, time to time, depending on what it is. All right, so we're at that point in the segment in the episode where we're going to take some listener questions or questions that we've been asked in sessions. And so the first one that I have been asked is, what is the connection between social anxiety and perfectionism? And I touched upon it a little bit with myself, but with the fear of judgment, so I just wrote a few things down just to compare them. But so the fear of judgment, social anxiety involves an intense fear of being negatively evaluated. And perfectionists often believe they must be flawless to be accepted. So that increases the anxiety in social situations. Avoidance and isolation. So perfectionists may withdraw from social interactions until they feel perfect enough to engage. We'll get those family pictures done when I've lost enough weight, I've done this, I've done, putting things off until I'm enough. And the isolation worsens the social anxiety because they avoid interactions and it prevents the exposure. Overthinking and self-criticism, I think that's pretty self-explanatory. So people with perfectionism and social anxious individuals overanalyze actions, everything, right? Thoughts, everything. And because they're afraid that they'll embarrass themselves. So both people with perfectionism and social anxiety. And both people with perfectionism and social anxiety both ruminate and they replay conversations over and over and over, looking for the mistakes or signs of rejection. And then procrastination and pressure. So perfectionists delay social interactions, believing that they must prepare extensively before engaging in it. That pressure heightens the anxiety in social interactions. So that's how the connection is there. The next question that I have is, how can I stop avoiding social situations? Again, your instinct will be to avoid because of the fear and the anxiety, so it makes it harder to engage. But if we identify the root cause, so ask yourself, what am I afraid of? What am I focusing on right now? Is it judgment? Is it rejection? Is it embarrassment? And then when we can recognize the reason behind the avoidance, then we can make a plan. We need to challenge those negative thoughts. Replace everyone will judge me with most people are too busy thinking about themselves or thinking about what they're doing to even see what I'm doing or to judge me. Use that cognitive restructuring that I had talked about, looking for the facts and everything, to change that thought. Use gradual exposure techniques. So gradually, I get clients sometimes to write down a fear ladder. So if I'm looking at going to a party, write down like minimal fear to the highest fear. And then start with easier situations and just kind of work through them a little bit. And then develop the coping strategies. So ground yourself. Count backwards from 100 by sevens. I know clients say to me, I can't count forwards by sevens. Name all of the cereals, cities, towns, fruits, vegetables, sports teams, movies, actors, whatever it happens to be. Name all of them you can think of. Ground yourself. Engage your prefrontal cortex, the thinking part, because then if it's engaged, you can rationalize things better, because that's what we need to engage to rationalize. And then prepare conversation topics ahead of time. So if you're going into a situation where you may have to make small talk or something, kind of come up with some ahead of time so that it's not that like and you can't think. All right, so there's our 2 questions. I hope you stuck with me through all of this. We're going to wrap it up now. If you have any questions about social anxiety, please feel free to ask us. If you have any stories you want to share, please feel free to share them. I want you to think about strengthening that resistance muscle, finding the facts, challenging those core beliefs, and try to be more understanding of people with social anxiety. I've just expressed to you how difficult it can be. It's not just about being shy. It's not just about wanting to be an introvert and avoid. It is a deep-rooted fear based on deep-rooted negative core beliefs. So let's be a little bit more understanding. And for those of you with it, try some of these try some of these strategies, all right? Challenge those thoughts. Find an alternate thought. Pull out the facts. All right. If you'd like to support us, please follow us on Spotify and subscribe to our channel on YouTube. We'd really appreciate that. All right. See you next week and take care of you.